Graphic designers, illustrators, photographers, and creators in general are facing a paradigm shift in the creative industry. Generative AI is the greatest disruptor since the invention of the internet. Are you concerned about tools like Midjourney, Stable Diffusion, Runway, and Adobe Firefly taking your job? Is AI a threat to creators, or is it a savior? Join me and my friend Tareq, who is an expert on generative AI, as we explore this controversial topic.
Hi everyone, my name is Tareq Fadel. I currently work for Adobe, so I'm a partner solutions architect, but my focus is on GenAI and the content supply chain. But I'm here, all my opinions are mine, and happy to discuss all aspects around generative AI, artificial intelligence, and what's happening in this space.
It's a huge debate in the creative community, especially. I think we are probably one of the most affected groups of people right now in terms of the impact of AI on society.
Very much so. I think we're in the Wild West at the moment, and with any new technology that's out, especially if it's impactful, it has a way of shaking things around or shaking things about. You will see this in various different industries that happen. And this is not only affecting the art community, this is affecting across the board. And it touches us personally because the process of creating content, whether this is text or images or art, is something that's personal, something that's very human. And it's a manual process, takes a lot of time, effort. And then when a machine is able to do something that's better than what you can do in a matter of seconds and at scale that beyond what humans can do, can be seen as threatening. It doesn't necessarily mean it is threatening. It's a tool. It's like any other tool that there is. And it allows us to do the things that we need to do. Generative AI without the human doesn't exist, because at the end of the day, we still need to use the tool. We need to put the prompt in, and it generates that art. We haven't reached artificial super intelligence as of yet. Maybe in the next generation, or maybe in the next 5 years, where it can think by itself and it's sentient, and it can come up with its own artistic capabilities and its own creations. But at the moment, it's a tool like any other tool, whether it's a car, a pen, or even Photoshop. We use it to produce what we need to produce. So if artists take that mentality or that approach and treat it like any other tool and use it as part of their portfolio, use it as part of their tool set, they'll be able to create art that's beyond the art that already exists. You're taking it to the next level. The amount of time that you're able to produce, let's say, for example, a watercolored image. You were able to do this with Photoshop just by applying a filter, but now you're able to do a cat on a mouse on the moon, right? You type that in as a prompt and it produces something. I can then take that and I can produce something that goes beyond that image that Gen AI has produced. So it gives you the flexibility to be able to create, essentially.
I like to think of it as like a creative playground, really, that is accessible and free for anyone to use. Because there's, again, another debate about democratization of art, making the creation of art available to anyone who has access to generative AI or image generators. But yeah, so we can think of it as like a playground. And it's actually a great tool for research and finding inspiration, because, to be honest, even though I'm using all the platforms that most creators would use, like Dribbble, Behance, Pinterest even, eventually you get stuck in a loop following the same artists or seeing the same results whenever you search something. While on a generative AI platform or tool, anytime you give a prompt, it would be always a completely new image or images that you get. So it's completely random or always fresh, in a way you can think about it like that.
That's correct, right? It uses a method of random, which is the seed. And by producing that image that's linked to that particular seed, it generates that image. And you can experiment with the level of creativity that it has in terms of identifying how much it can go beyond the realms of the prompt that you've given, or stick to the prompt that you've given it. And that gives it that level of creativity. Similar if you were given a brief and you needed to stick to the brief, or you were given a very vague brief and you have the option to go beyond what the brief says. The concept is similar in that aspect. And again, using that aspects of neural networks, essentially the machine starts to think very similar in the way that we think. Generally speaking, machines have been structured or in a step-by-step fashion, programmed in a way to mimic a behavior. But with the neural networks, you're giving them the freedom to define their own thought pattern, which gives you that creative element of being able to create the content that you're looking for. But that's true. At the end of the day, as you mentioned, it will produce whatever it's learned from that data set. And that data set essentially is where the machine has learned to create those images. And it will produce a new image by all of the images that it's learned. And you don't know what is going to come out. And this is exactly what we do, right? When we look at an image, we get inspired by that image. That image is somewhere in the back of our mind, in our subconscious. It may not be in exactly the same format, unless you've got photographic memory, but it'll be in a representation of that image somewhere in our brain, stored in a very different way than you would store a file. In some ways, and I'm talking very high level here, in some ways it's the same concept. That image doesn't really exist in that new data set that's stored as part of whether that's Stability Diffusion or any other model. It's there as a series of pointers to be able to create that image, right? And from all of the images that it's seen, it tries to create something of what represents that. Sometimes it gets it wrong, and sometimes it gets it right. And this is the process where it learns from what it's produced. Essentially, they have a model within that model called a GAN, where essentially it's two different models, one that produces the image and the other one that checks to see if the image matches. If it doesn't, it throws it away and it tries again until it finds the image that matches that aspect. And essentially your training, or whoever's training that model, trains it or fine-tunes that model until it works effectively based on the high quality that there is. This has been over a number of years. It's not necessarily something that's new, but then that comes to the other aspects of the ethics and the quality and whether, are these images that are produced, are they ethical, right? Have you used them with the appropriate permissions, right? Have you asked for permission? Again, that all depends on regulation, all depends on governance. And at the moment, we're in those early stages of experimentation. We haven't really set and defined those. And I'm sure over the next 2 to 3 years, you'll start to see these regulations and these aspects of what you can and can't do, right? Similar to what we have with copyright. I can't, for example, go and take an image or a photograph that someone's done and print it and then make money off it, right? Because that's copyright law. But in the early days of when art was produced, there was no copyright law. And in some other countries, there is no copyright law. But now there is. And it's the same with AI. It will take time to catch up, but eventually it will catch up.
I think the biggest problem at the moment is that many of these image generators, they used work from artists who never heard about those platforms and they never opted in. Those platforms can mimic their work very closely. So it's recognizable for everyone that, yes, this looks like the work of that artist, even though it's not. Although it's just mimics their work, so it's on the surface level similar to it. But the problem is that the artists, when they see these generated images, it actually can be very offensive to them because it doesn't represent their philosophies, their personal ideas, which obviously is very personal. Like an artwork created by an artist has much more than just the actual composition and the visual. It always carries a message, something that they want to say with their work. And when an image generator just replicates and mimics their style, that can be very, very upsetting for artists, beyond the problem of not getting credit or not getting paid for what's happening with these generators. So I think that's clearly one of the most important aspects that has to be fixed and has to be governed with laws. And I know the EU is starting to try to implement already something like this at the moment. It's not very specific, but generally what I think it tries to do is that all of the data sets have to be transparent. So it has to be possible to track which are the images that were used to train data sets.
With Adobe Firefly, it's using public domain images that are in the public domain, essentially, from a copyright perspective, and also any images that were in the stock library, Adobe stock, that is. So again, from a licensing perspective, they have the rights. One of the aspects that they're going to be introducing is, as an artist, that if you have a photograph and you submit that to Adobe stock, you'll have the capability of choosing the option of do not train. And by doing so, that will be emitted from any future data sets for the purpose of training Adobe Firefly. And also, they're looking at aspects of how they can compensate any of the artists that when images are generated that uses then that particular image, they are then therefore compensated based on that. But that's yet to come. On the aspect, I just wanted to touch on so I'll give you an example. So Steve McCurry with the Afghan girl, the famous image that's on Time magazine from the 80s. So if you go to Midjourney and you type in Afghan girl, previously, if you type that in, you will get a very close representation of Steve McCurry's photo. And obviously Steve McCurry was not happy with this. So he complained to Midjourney and decided that he would take them to court. Midjourney obviously did not want to go to court in this case, but eventually the outcome was that they have now banned the word. If you type in Afghan girl, it will not produce an image for you to avoid them getting into litigation. That doesn't change the fact that that image is in the data set, right? That image is there. It's just you can't prompt it to give that image. And there are ways, and there are what are called jailbreaks, where essentially, depending on how you say it, or if you use a different language, or the way you phrase it, you can still get that image produced, but you may not have used those banned words that produces that image. So a lot of artists now are saying, well, I don't want you to be able to produce this image because, again, I'm not getting the compensation for that, but also it's my copyright. I haven't given you the permission to do so. And it will be up to essentially the countries and the regulation and the governments to enforce this law. Currently, how it is in the US, any images that are produced via artificial intelligence are essentially not copyrightable. So if they're not copyrightable, it's difficult for you to claim copyright on them if it's your image. So it's a bit of a gray area as it is in the US at the moment. As you mentioned, in the EU, yes, they're introducing some laws. It's still being drafted. Once it's kind of put into place, it'll take 2 years before it becomes law. And so that will take time. So it's really interesting to see the evolution of how this comes along. And again, we're in very early stages. And I remember reading an aspect where photography first came around in the late 1800s. A lot of the artists that used to do portraits, that's the only way that you would be able to capture somebody's photograph, right? You would have to hire a painter and they would do something like the Mona Lisa. And then photography came along and they were threatened by this new technology. And essentially it was like a war, right? The artists versus the photographers. But, here we are over 150 years later, and photography and art still coexist, right? And there's still an industry for art and there's still an industry for photography. Now, fast forward 150 years from now, and I think we'll be in the same boat, but with different technologies, with different mediums. And that's essentially where we are.
Just going back to what you said about the mimicry of an artist's style, I think direct or exact style mimicry is another thing that if I was the one coming up with the legislation, I would actually ban that completely. So like having a prompt including an artist's name should be ignored. Like it would still generate something, but it wouldn't follow that artist's style. What I would allow is to have maybe minimum 3 inputs. So having 3 different artists' style or work being used as a reference, and then create a hybrid of those. That's something similarly resembling how creatives work in general. When we look at references and when we come up with our research, we create a mood board. We would lay out work by at least 3 different sources, and then we merge those together and we melt them into something new. So I think that's a better approach than allowing a complete and direct or exact mimicry for these image generators.
Before we continue, I just wanted to let you know about our creative membership program. For a small monthly fee, you get access to over 200 hours of Adobe certified online training courses. Master all the tools and skills needed to become a professional graphic designer or illustrator. As a pro member, you will get mentoring from me and my team, access to webinars, student forum, and creative briefs to help you build an outstanding portfolio. Pro members can also download the project files for all of our YouTube tutorials. Sign up at yesimadesigner.com/memberships and start your free trial today.
Upcoming artists especially are affected that once they see the ease of which these image generators can create or produce artwork, they will be dissuaded or demoralized from learning and practicing skills, because of course becoming good at something takes a long time. We all know of the 10,000 hours rule, that if you want to be really good at something, you really have to invest the time. And it applies to everything, like drawing, of course, illustration, graphic design itself as well, understanding the theories and practicing the techniques. Even though that there's lots of tools that can make you work fast, the actual skill and understanding of how things work takes a long time, and really you have to practice it. But when you see image generators getting more and more advanced, and I don't think we are far from seeing even like full posters generated from briefs, creative briefs, with all the context in it, with the text and everything already placed in. It concerns not just new artists, but also graphic designers and creators in general. So they are not going to be interested, or they are demoralized from learning, but also from developing their style, because they will be afraid of their style being stolen from them. So they are also going to be reluctant to share their work, because once it's shared online, it's so much easier for these data sets to devour the essence of their style. And then essentially there will be a lack of incentive to improve and sharing their work. It's almost like locking up a plant in a dark room and not giving it water. That's how I imagine a creative person facing the dangers of generative AI, or the threats that generative AI can cause.
I disagree with you on that aspect. And I'll tell you why, right? Because naturally, we are humans. We like to create, right? And we like to share. And this is abundant, and you can see this. Like the new generation Z, I think the latest generation's Generation Z, I think. They are the biggest sharers compared to any previous generation, right? If you look at the content that they're creating, every Gen Zer is a content creator compared to the previous generation and the previous generation before that, and so on. And I don't think that is going to change. I think it's going to accelerate. I think we're going to share a lot more and create a lot more. And this goes back to my first point, is that Gen AI is just a tool. It allows you to produce what you want to produce, which is ideas that you have in your head that can then be shared and distributed. And we've seen this. We've seen this on Twitter, and we've seen this on Instagram. The amount of synthographers, and for those of you watching, a synthographer is somebody who can put in a prompt and get some amazing AI-generated art. And we've seen this, right? And they've shared some amazing prompts, right? And with those prompts, they've created some amazing pieces of imagery that I wouldn't have even imagined of typing in that prompt, right? Now, is the prompt itself creative, or is it the image itself that's creative? I think it's a combination of both, because again, to be able to produce that is, in some ways revolutionary. Now, if you can take those images and produce something else, which I've seen, take that image and then put that through Runway, and then you can create these short clips. Take this and put it through another tool, and you can create some augmented reality. And so that basically being able to use these tools in conjunction allows you to create creations that hadn't been created before. So it's essentially just another tool that allows you to create and share. And I don't think it will dissuade the next generation. But far from it. It'll give them the tools to be able to create more.
One of my ideal scenarios that I can imagine is that there will be a model, or there will be a tool, let's just say Procreate, for instance, would come up with a feature where you can have your assistant or apprentice. So the AI, generative AI bot could be your apprentice who is watching what you're doing. So every line that you draw in the app is something that is going to learn from. And eventually, the more you use the tool, the closer it gets to the way that you work. And then you will be able to control it exactly how much control you want to give. So you can say, you start a sketch and you say, just continue drawing this for me. And then you can set the speed of which that creation is happening. So it's almost like a time lapse. You can speed it up or slow it down, and you can pause at any moment and take over. It really gives you the control of how much creative freedom you are giving the tool and how much you want to still keep yourself. Just exactly like the masters, great masters had many apprentices, and either they would start the work and the master would finish it, or vice versa. It could work like that, and it would allow a creator to be extremely productive, or maybe not the amount of work that they output that would change, but the quality of the work, because they could experiment with a lot of different ideas. So this is something I can see as an ideal scenario as well, where you have the way that you can train an AI model on your style. It could be illustration, it could be graphic design, whatever you want, but in a way you would own that model. And whether that could be sold then or not is another question, but let's just say that's something that is your creation. It's something that you can think of it as being like an extension of yourself. So that's again a positive way of seeing things. And do you think that's, again, we are close to this, or maybe it's already something that is possible right now to do something like that?
I haven't seen an example of that, but yes, I think it's very much possible. Because what you're referencing here is the concept of an AI agent. And an AI agent is someone who is essentially your assistant. Think of it like the butler in Iron Man. So that's an AI example who helps him and does everything that they need to do. You could have that in every aspect. I could have an AI agent that helps me write a novel. So essentially it prompts me, and writers have writer's block. But as I'm writing something, it then, typing it into a word processor, it then gives me ideas of how to start my paragraph. And then let's say, for example, I've written 5 paragraphs. I don't know how to start my next chapter. Again, it gives me ideas. Those ideas, I as the author would have to choose which of that I need to do. And again, you can apply that to imagery as well. You can apply that to video, and you can apply it to anything that there is. Because at the end of the day, the choices that the human makes is the ultimate choice of what defines that as the art. We've seen this in LLMs and large language models. Whatever you create, for example, if I write a blog article and I push that through ChatGPT to improve the wording and improve it to make sure that it's a lot more readable, the content that's produced, although it's none of the words that I wrote, it's reworded, but I then go back and edit it until it gets to a point where it's published. Is that piece of work produced by ChatGPT, or is it produced by me? And it's the same with the art. So I could use the AI generator to type in a few words, and then it generates an image. I take that image, do some edits and backwards and forwards until I get to the aspects of where I want it to be. And you start to see this in Photoshop, where you highlight a certain area and you type in your generative command, then it edits that. It produces a new part, but the rest of it is your images, is your creation that you've produced. And I go back to saying that AI is a tool as an example of that. If you take a very complex piece of artwork that's produced in Adobe Illustrator today, all right, in the latest version of Adobe Illustrator, and recreate that same piece of artwork using Adobe Illustrator version 1, you'll probably be able to create it, but it'll take you 10 times, if not 20 times longer. You can just now produce this. Let's say, for example, it'll take you 2 hours. Had you not had all the tools that are in Adobe Illustrator, some of them are now GenAI tools, and you needed to produce this with just the Bezier tool. That will take you literally 2 days or 3 days to be able to produce it. So you're able to produce the quality you want to produce just a lot quicker.
Generative AI really forces you to articulate your ideas because you have to put them into words, no matter what you want to generate, but you have to still articulate things. And as a graphic designer, I always tell this to my students that you are a visual communicator. You have to learn to describe what you are trying to create, because without understanding that, your work won't be effective. It won't answer the brief. So it's all about communication, art, and that actually applies to everything, photography as well, illustration. So it shares a lot of similarity to how image generators work as well, where you have to describe what you want. So it still requires imagination. It still requires coming up with concepts and ideas. And of course, the other concept that's important is that whatever you generate with an image generator or a GenAI tool, it doesn't have to be the end product. It could be part of the research. It could be something that will end up being partially used in a final composition. Myself, at the moment, I'm actually already adapted a workflow where I combine multiple GenAI tools together with the existing knowledge that I have. So it's becoming a hybrid of manual work that I do with the existing tools, and even not relying on a single generative AI tool, but combining them together, like Midjourney, Photoshop Generative Fill, and a couple of other tools that I've been working with and testing.
And, on that aspect, right, we're talking text to image to create those image generation. But we need to start thinking multimodal, image to 3D, 3D to video, text to video, and basically whatever medium and format that there is. Essentially, what you're doing is you have ideas in your head and you're transforming that into another medium. And as he said, it's a form of communication. Why whoever's consuming that content can then consume it and then translate it back into ideas into their head. So it's a way of communication, right? As we're communicating using words, like we could communicate versus images, videos, or whatever medium that there is. And I'm sure in the future, there'll be other mediums that we hadn't even discovered. As I mentioned, in the late 1800s, that's when photographs were first new to us. But before that, it wasn't. And then video came and so on. And who knows what the future medium will be.
Thank you so much, Tareq, for your time. I hope our viewers will find this debate or discussion useful. If anyone has any questions about this, please make sure you leave it in the comments below. And then if you want to see more of this, let us know. I'm sure Tareq will be up for some more answering some questions maybe from you. But yeah, thanks a lot, Tareq, and see you guys in the next one.
Thank you, Martin. Bye-bye.